Hello, hello, Midwest entrepreneurs. This is Casey Allen. I'm the creator of Enterprise Rising Conference. For those that might have just joined, here's a quick orientation around. If you need to look at the agenda, just click on the calendar up there. If you want to bounce to other buildings, we have 3 other buildings. You can click on I'm pointing the wrong direction here, mirror image. Click on the buildings over there. We have different buildings for different reasons, depending on what you want to accomplish. During the talks, if you want to ask a question, you can click the chat box down below, or you can just feel free to chat amongst the other people as well. And I'm super excited to bring up on stage here in just a little bit Brian Johnson, who was the founder and CEO of Braintree, which was a B2B SaaS company, fintech company that sold to some of the biggest names around, Uber, Airbnb, pretty much anyone that processed tons and tons of payments in the over the last, let's say, 10 years. Pre-Stripe was a Braintree customer, and he's going to talk about the journey of building that. We're waiting for him right now to find his way in. Hold on one second. Justin, you might want to pull him up on stage if you can. Just one second here as we search for the right human. As always, I would I chastise you. I plead with you to ask questions, lots of them in the Q&A. There's a chat and there's also a Q&A. If you ask in the Q&A, I'm much more likely to see it, and I'm much more likely to be able to weave it into the interview that I do with Brian and make sure that your question gets asked. He's going to be talking about everything from the early days of Braintree to selling it. And welcome to the stage, Brian. If the technical gods can smile upon us for just a brief moment. And while I do this, I just want to remind everyone that all the talks are recorded. You can also watch the talks from other buildings too, if you want to watch it while conversing or having video chat with other people. I know quite a few people do that. So up here in the corner, if you're in another building, you can hit play. You can actually see and hear while you're actually having a video chat with 1 or 4 other people. And Justin, so I'm going to try to bring Brian up on stage here. Oh, just kidding. Here he is. Hey, Brian. Welcome.
Hey.
Welcome to the virtual stage, Enterprise Rising.
Thank you.
It's good to have you. And so there's a lot of ground to cover in not a lot of time. So do you? We originally had you scheduled until let's see here, 1:20. Is that still okay with you? Which would be 11:20 your time.
That works.
Okay. All right. Awesome. I'm not going to start out with a sentence. I'm actually going to start out with a quote from you, Brian, that you had given in a different interview. And the quote is, I would lay on my bed and just want to die. I didn't want to exist. And I bring that up not to necessarily start the interview on such a sad tone, but rather to impress upon every founder in the audience that oftentimes you will see or read interviews or listen to podcasts, interviews of people, and it seems like they have just crushed it from beginning to end. And where you might be wondering, why isn't it this easy for me? Like, why every single week do I feel like everything is going wrong and the weight of the world is on my shoulders? And why am I flawed, right? What is absolutely wrong with me? And so I wanted to just start with that quote, just to paint the picture that everyone has an inner battle that they are fighting that you cannot see. And that even the people that we might look at and say, wow, like that person reached a high degree of success. I really aspire for that too. But it looked so easy for them. So over this interview, we're going to go pretty deep and pretty wide ranging into Brian's journey. And Brian, for you, it all started with selling phones. So can you tell us about college and selling door to door and hiring cheap college kids?
Yeah. Do you want that, or do you want the?
Yeah.
I just want to.
No, we'll get to the you want to die. We'll get to that in just a little bit.
Okay. The selling phones was a conclusion of, I guess when I was 21 years old, I returned from living in Ecuador among extreme poverty. And I had this burning desire that I wanted to do good in the world, to help people at some large scale. I didn't know what, just had that burning desire. And in contemplating what that might entail, I looked around at the things I could do, and I couldn't really map anything. I wasn't good at anything, really. And so I thought, you know what, I'll just become an entrepreneur. I'll make a whole bunch of money by the age of 30. And then with abundance of money, I'll do something useful in the world. And the contemplation was that at 30, if I had the money, I wouldn't need the permission of someone else. I could discern what I wanted to do and why, and then just do it. And so the cell phones really was the beginning of just looking at the math and realizing if I get a job and I'm making $10 an hour or $20 an hour or even $100 an hour, there's no way I can achieve these financial goals. So I have to figure out some way of making a lot more money in the same period of time. And that was my first time. So when I looked at the time I was spending in college, I was making something like $300 to $500 an hour on my effort. So it was an easy thing for me to do to study in school, make some quick money, but then also not consume my entire life with the business because I still wanted to finish school.
Got it. So talk about how you stumbled into the world of cell phones.
I needed a cell phone. When I came back from Ecuador, the whole world had them, and then when I left, they didn't. And so I wanted to find a deal. I found a gentleman in the Yellow Pages, back when that was a thing, and he said, "Hey, you seem like you're energetic and smart. Why don't you sell phones for me?" And I said, "Okay, great. Like, what's the?" He said, "I'll pay you $40 commission per phone." And I did the math. I thought, like, $40, $80 an hour. That's good. So I did that for him for about 17 hours. I was on the porch selling this phone to this woman with a crying baby in her arms. And I thought, wait a second, if I'm selling phones for him, why can't others sell phones for me? And it just, I ran home and I built the business. I set up the business in the next day or two, and I was off.
Awesome. Fast forwarding you to your foray into payments. Fast forward a couple of years, and you ended up you weren't selling cell phones forever, and you were desperate for a job. You found yourself desperate for a job. And so you took a gig selling credit card processing. And so for those in the audience that aren't super clear what that means, when you're running a business, whether it's online or offline, back then it was probably more offline, you need a third-party company that's just going to process every swipe. And those companies have massive sales forces, lots of salespeople. What is enlighten us? What was the life of a card processing salesperson like?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I had the need is at the time I had my first 2 children, and I was involved in a partnership. We were doing a $50 million mixed use real estate project.
Okay.
And we had gone without money for 2 years. We had debt up to our eyeballs. And so I needed some to keep me so I could pay the bills and keep the kids fed and still do this venture full time. And so then I was on Monster and a few other job sites trying to find, what I did is I needed something flexible to allow me to do this. And so I found a listing of the 50 most wealthy people in Utah. And I wrote them all a letter. And I said, hey, I'm young, I'm smart, I'm energetic, I'm extremely resourceful. I can come be your right-hand person and do this. And no one responded. And then I also went online and tried to find jobs. I probably did over 60 jobs and not a single response back. So at this point, I was absolutely desperate to make money to pay bills at the home. And credit card processing, there was this job that said, come go door to door, we'll pay you commission only. And I thought, this sounds awful, but okay, I'll do it. And so I took the job, and fortunately, it was one of the best things I ever did because it introduced me to the world of payments that I didn't know I would even care about ever. So, go ahead.
I just want to lay the groundwork because a lot of people perhaps listening to this don't know anybody that sells credit card processing. They've never met anybody and they've never been on the receiving end. And you wouldn't really, unless you like ran a restaurant or ran a hotel or ran a bakery and got hit up by these people. But when Brian is talking about going door to door, you mean from business to business, right? You're not walking residential. And you're trying to interrupt the general manager or ask for the owner to try to give them a pitch. And for those that don't know, credit card processing salespeople are probably the most hated people in businesses, right? I mean, business owners just have zero interest in talking to you.
Yeah, I'm impressed. You know this. That's right. So the moment you walk in the door, and they try to discern who you are, and they realize it, their face changes, and it's like, just leave. Like, I don't have time for you. You're the fifth person to come in this morning. No. Like, whatever you're selling, no. And then you say credit card processing, it's like 3 times as worse. It's like, I've been screwed every single time I have changed my credit card processing. Like, they're hiding fees, or they're like selling a lease that's like, absorbent fees. And so there's this reputation of a dishonest industry. And so it was not just the salesperson, but it was like, I distrust all of you. Get out. And so, yeah, it was like quite a hostile environment on a daily basis too. So what I did is I knew I needed to figure out a solution for this, because I only had a very small amount of time in a given week while pursuing this other endeavor to do it. And so I came up with this plan where I'd walk in the door, I'd get the facial reaction, I'd get the response, and I'd pull out a $100 bill and I'd say, we'll give you this $100 for 3 minutes of your time. And if you conclude it's not worth your time after spending 3 minutes, you can have it. And so usually they'd be like, all right, man, that's interesting. Good job. So then I would sit down and I would walk them through. I'd say, like, here's the industry, here's the players, here's what they do. And I would disclose to them, like, I'm no different than anyone else. Like, literally hundreds of companies have the same offering to the company I'm representing. The thing I can offer you is honesty, great customer support, and you can just have this be done. Like, that's what I offer. But really, I'm not going to try to sell you something that doesn't exist. And in doing that, I don't know what my close rate was, but probably something around like 70 to 80%, where what people were buying was not credit card processing. They were buying trust. And that's what I figured out. And so if I could establish that bridge of trust and I could deliver on it, and then I could say, hey, also, these 4 businesses who are your neighbors, they also use me and they're happy to talk to you about it. It just became a thing I could scale pretty quickly because it was systematized, built on trust.
Got it. And trust is important because credit card processing as an industry is this massively not trusted, right?
That's right.
That's right. So again, unless you ran a brick and mortar business sometime in the last 20 years, you wouldn't know. But credit card processing salespeople are on the trust hierarchy of trust. It's like politicians, Russian mobsters, and then credit card processing salespeople, because they will make it as complicated and hard to understand as possible, almost as a best practice, almost as a institutionalized part of the industry. And so here you are. You finally have something where you're good at it, right? So you can actually feel good about yourself. You're making money, you're printing money, so you're actually making a great income. And then you decide, you know what? Actually, I need to start something else. I need to start Braintree. Why? Why would you walk away from something that seemed to, on the surface, be working for you and giving you everything that you want in life, and decide you needed to do something different or bigger or better?
At this point, I was 26, and a few things happened. One is this real estate venture wasn't going to turn out to be the thing I thought it would be, and so therefore that was coming to a likely close. 2 is, after spending 12 months in the payments industry, sorry, something just came up on my screen. After spending a year in the payments industry, I became familiar with what worked, what didn't work, and where the opportunities were. And then 3 is I had a customer base that was generating around, I think it was $50,000 a month of residual revenue. And I got a cut of that, but I thought, interesting, if I could build that all on my own, I've got $500,000 coming in and there's no work other than the occasional customer support call. So it's a great residual stream of money. And then I thought, of course, like, what if I can scale this? So I piecing those things together. I thought, okay, I'm 26, my goal's 30. I think I see something here that's the right opportunity. And so really, I think in growing up in Utah in a small rural town, and I basically didn't know, I did not meet an engineer until my early 20s. I was surrounded by blue collar, and therefore I was never exposed to the world of computer software or of other engineering fields. And therefore, I think the possibilities that I could have chosen on businesses to pursue were pretty limited. They were, more like analog businesses, cell phones and real estate. And then when I saw payments, it was the first time I thought, this is a technology entry point, the first one that I had seen as viable. And so then it just became, I guess I became convinced that this was my path of trying to achieve the goal by 30, of building a payments company that, given that online payments was growing so strongly and that there was this big opportunity.
Got it. Now, you weren't technical. You didn't have a technical co-founder. How did you build the early Braintree product? I
didn't have any money to fund long development cycles. So I knew I couldn't develop the software out of the gate. And I also knew it was unlikely that I was going to be able to attract venture capital, because who's going to invest in a non-technical founder building a technical product? And what I did is I found a company that had a white label payment service that I could label as Braintree, and I got all the core payment capabilities that I needed. And so I used them for the first 18 months as my primary means, and I focused a lot on customer acquisition. And to figure out customer acquisition, I had to figure out a way how to acquire customers without spending money, and also without having to go up and down the street. And I read a scientific paper about the social characteristics of various programming languages. So for example, what are the social dynamics in the .NET community, Python, Ruby on Rails, etc.? And interestingly, there were character attributes that were associated with these development languages. And specifically, Ruby on Rails was the most densely coordinated and socially connected community out of all development languages. And so I hypothesized that if I could go out there and find the leaders of that community, and they could become customers and they would vouch for us, then it would spread to the entire community. And that's exactly what happened. And so the creator of Ruby on Rails, DHH and Jason Fried of 37 Signals, now Basecamp, they became a customer and started singing our praises. Shopify did, GitHub did, and a few other prominent Ruby on Rails users. And within a year or so, we had a very dominant presence of Ruby on Rails. And so all we had to do was just respond to these incoming emails of like, hey, so-and-so told me about it. Can we get this set up quickly? Like, yes, sure. And then after we did that with Ruby on Rails, we replicated that in Python, etc. And so for the first 4 years of the company's existence, I didn't do any advertising. I blogged about the industry, trying to create orientation for people of what was going on, because it's a very complicated thing. So trying to make it very easy to understand, and built all on social proof that if people whom they trusted would be the appropriate signaling for them to come in and become a customer. And so we became one of the fastest growing companies in America twice in a row with the Inc. magazine guidelines. And we did it without any investment capital. So I didn't take any investors. We just bootstrapped it. We were profitable every single month since inception. And it was right place, right time, right formula.
Awesome. Well, there you have it. Founders, go find the Ruby on Rails of your industry, whatever that happens to be. Densely social, that shares lots of information, and that tend to blog. Like I know back in the Braintree days, Jason Fried and DHH were both heavy bloggers and very very outward facing, right? So pretty much anything they talked about, they had tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people that were willing to follow. Um, that's amazing. And so engineering teams were your customer, right? You were selling to developers
that's
who had to build product and build payments into it. And up until that point, there was no great way from a software perspective to do that, meaning a lot of the credit card processing tools that existed in that day sucked to work with if you were an engineer, and they didn't like the current options in front of them. And then you came along. Was there so you were selling without spending any money? Was there a point at Braintree when you actually started building out an actual sales team?
Yeah, around year 4, we started building it out because it became apparent that we were onto something big. When I started the company, I made this business plan, and I communicated that the way I was going to do it is because everyone knew in payments, the only payments company really making a lot of money was PayPal. And it was them because they had a two-sided marketplace. They had customers who could, consumers, individuals who could fund their account via their checking account. And when they did that, PayPal didn't have a cost of payment. They didn't have to pay the bank's fees. So they could they could basically capture like all of the 3% fee that they're charging merchants versus just a very small portion of that. So their margins were very big. And so there were several companies that tried to become like PayPal early on, and they tried to build a two-sided marketplace out of the gate, and that's just too hard. PayPal had the luxury of building with eBay, where they jumped on and they helped the auctions transact. And so my plan was build for the first 4 to 5 years the merchant base, build the customer base, the businesses that will be using the payments platform. And that worked. So 37 Signals, GitHub, Airbnb, Uber, we had some of the best merchants in the whole world using our payment system. And my plan at the state of the business was then 5 years in, then buy the consumer side, buy the individual funding. And that's when we bought Venmo. And when we bought Venmo, we closed up the loop. Right now, people could fund their account via checking account or credit card. We had millennials who used Venmo with millennials who were using GitHub and Airbnb, et cetera, and Uber, and we put them together. And that was really what everyone was trying to do is get the two-sided marketplace, and that's what we did. And that's what really catapulted our growth.
Right on. And so for those listening, wondering why Brian's talking about Venmo, it might be forgotten about now because it was so long ago, but Braintree actually acquired Venmo in Venmo's early days. And we all know now that Venmo is ubiquitous and everyone uses it and that it's owned by PayPal. But there was a day when it was not owned by PayPal, when it was just a little fast growing startup, and who was, I believe when you acquired them, they were bleeding money, right?
They didn't have revenue, correct.
Okay. So there's no real clear business model there, but Braintree had acquired them. And that's why today PayPal owns Venmo, is because PayPal acquired Braintree.
Yes.
Here you are, you're profitable and you're fast growing. Why raise venture capital at all? You went on to raise VC from really a who's who list of top tier Silicon Valley firms. You went on to raise quite a bit of money over the years from venture capital. Why did you make the decision to raise it all? What was the thought process? What was the thought process behind that at the time?
Mm-hmm. See, we raised our first round, if I'm not mistaken, in 2011, and we were profitable. We were growing like crazy. The fundraise was to take money off the table. Basically that first round of funding was just money I put in the bank to say, I'm done. That if something catastrophic happens to Braintree, I'm good. And because I thought, I didn't want to go back to the drawing board and start from scratch. And so taking that money allowed me to say, all right, I'm taken care of, I'm good. Now let's swing for the fences. And then from that first funding round, I think it was something like 18 months later, we got acquired. So it was pretty quickly that it happened thereafter. But this was really all in the objective I had was, I guess, importantly, what was going on in my mind is, when I started at 21, my ambition was I'd like to do something that benefits people. Like it's something at scale that's helpful to people generally. Over that duration of time, I went through significant personal change. I left my born into religion. It was pretty clear my marriage was going to end. I had gone through this deep chronic depression, and so therefore my outlook on existence would differ dramatically. And as I surveyed the world, my orientation was more around how can the human race survive itself and thrive. It's not clear to me that like we are just really well situated for the future. And so in that time frame, as I took the money off the table to say I'm good, my orientation was increasingly looking at at a species level, what one thing could I do? And that's really where my mind started going. Is now that the capital was beginning to solve itself, it was a contemplation of how could I possibly choose a given endeavor that has species level impact.
Got it. Now, when you were going through that dark period that you just spoke of, when your marriage was in trouble, you were leaving your religion. I assume the Mormon religion, yes?
Correct.
Okay. Which I'm sure had to have had massive ramifications for the relationship with your family, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When was that? Was that right before Braintree, or was that during?
During.
Okay. How did you seek help, and who helped you through that? Were there people that you could turn to, or did you turn to any kind of external source to help you through those dark days?
Sadly, no. And there's a confluence of factors that contributed to that. One is in the Mormon religion, expression of doubt is seen as weakness, as an undesirable characteristic. People want to be viewed as faithful and strong and have unquestioned commitment on what they believe. And to admit that you're doubting certain things creates a lot of community risk. It's like, oh, is this person on the fringe? Is this person need special help? It's a precarious situation. And then on the personal front, I was so consumed with building the startup and with the family affairs and the kids, etc. I didn't have personal relationships that I built, and let alone personal relationships that I thought I could get to a level of expression that would be helpful. So no, I was entirely on my own, and I really am sad about that. I wish I would have been smarter and done that. And what really changed for me though is I got invited to speak at this conference in Chicago, and I decided that I was going to take a different approach. I had hiked Mount Kilimanjaro as part of a project to raise money for clean water wells in Tanzania, and I related that story because it was a life-changing experience climbing that mountain, really in terms of everything going on in my life. And right before me in the conference, a few entrepreneurs from the local Chicago community who were doing really well, they got up and they just were upbeat, and they're like, this is 4 lessons on how to do this thing and 4 lessons on this thing. And there was like 25 or so entrepreneurs in the room, but it was very much a power disposition of these people made it. They know what to do. They're dispensing wisdom. And I got up and followed them, and I relayed my story about climbing Kilimanjaro, and I broke down and cried uncontrollably for a few minutes. I could not regain my composure. And it was the first time I had done that. And interestingly, after that, something like 15 to 20 of those entrepreneurs came up afterwards and hugged me and said, I am you. Like, I am in that much pain. My world is that much turmoil. Yes, like this is exactly what's going on. And it was the first time, and it goes back to what you were saying in the very beginning, that each person's individualized experience in life is chaotic by default. And it's just a question of what degree of chaos is in your life and how intense is it. And do you have the structures? But in opening up, it was such an intense feeling of freedom that I no longer had to conceal these things, and that I could share them with others, and I could share them broadly, and that it was a facilitator for me to connect with people, and that was one of the most significant experiences of my life. And it's probably created more opportunity to connect with other people than anything I've ever done.
When you invest now and help other entrepreneurs as they launch and grow their businesses, are there questions that you ask them that you suspect not very many investors ask them because of your experiences?
I mean, I suppose that in any entrepreneur I'm evaluating, I'm trying to model them out. And I'm trying to model, I know as a founder, there's chaos churning. And so I guess I'm assessing the entrepreneur of how forthright can they be in this conversation, and to level set with me and to set my expectations. They are representing to me a certain model of the world and of themselves. And the question is, can I trust their modeling abilities, both of themselves in this moment? Are they trying to conceal something from me? And then what is their model accuracy going forward? So yeah, I'm modeling them as a system of intelligence that I can trust, and that it can be accurate.
Got it. Do you ask them questions about their personal life or their personal state or the stability?
I don't. I want them to offer that up.
Got it.
Yeah, and not to say that I'm interested in establishing a personal therapeutic relationship with entrepreneurs. What I'm interested in is someone giving me raw data. Then we can both make good decisions. But a conciliatory disposition is not helpful for them or me, because we can't model.
Got it. That makes sense. So Braintree is growing fast and you're raising money. You took some money off the table just to lock that in for yourself, just to give yourself some level of stability. The company is growing to hundreds and hundreds of employees. What are some of the decisions that you made early on at Braintree around the culture that you wanted to build, that you look back and be like, yeah, that was a really smart thing that I did. I really like that, and I'm now using that in the company that I'm building today. What were some of the smarter decisions around culture that you made that are staying with you even today?
Mm-hmm. I mean, two things really. One is, I always make the statement that we were building a company that would last. That it was not intended that we build a flash in the pan. We weren't building to be acquired we were building for an enduring, long-term, consequential business. And that has hundreds and hundreds of follow-on thought processes on what you do on a given basis. Because if you're optimizing for the short term, it's a very clear set of decisions versus doing long term. And so one is the long-term horizon. Two is to figure out something that people can identify with as passion related. And so it's difficult to generate a lot of passion around payments. So the question is, how do you configure an identity structure that is meaningful? And what I created was that we would be an emulation worthy company, that we would be exceptional at everything we did, from the APIs we created to the customer support to the integration to whatever it was, that people would walk away from their interaction with us as a company and say, I want to be like them. And I would share on a regular basis these love letters we'd get from our customers. That was one of our core 3 objectives, is to be so good that people would literally write us love letters. And in sharing that, it would reinforce this culture that we are exceptional. That's how we behave. That's how we think. That's what we aspire to. We don't accept anything less. And I think those 2 principles has enabled Braintree. I guess the company is now for almost 14 years old now, and it's part of the global payments infrastructure. I mean, it is a massive company, and to see that is immensely gratifying, versus building something that was bought and then kind of put into the basement of other stuff. And I think those are the two of the things that really contributed to our ability to build that kind of long-term global value.
So had established yourself as a leader in the industry amongst developers for sure, and a lot of household names, a lot of apps that are on our phones today are still powered by Braintree that rose from the ashes in the early 2000 teens. And you had the interesting experience of seeing Stripe come to fruition. So you guys were doing exceptionally well, still growing fast, probably doing, I'm guessing, tens of millions of dollars at this point. And then Stripe came on the scene, and they got a lot of buzz and a lot of press, and they went to YC, and they raised a lot of money from some very smart people out of the gate. Did that impact your psychology at all as a CEO, seeing a company that all of a sudden was a real competitor and a real threat come to prominence very fast? And if so, like, how did it worry you or stress you out at all?
I mean, competition is built into the fabric of our biological existence. I mean, biological systems compete at every level. The plant network does, humans do, evolution does. Like, it's a fundamental aspect of our existence. So no, like, that's just part of the course for existence. And number two, competition in many ways is like a daily vitamin. It's like a nutritional drink. It's just like it. Humans respond extraordinarily well to competition. And so, no, I think Stripe did a fantastic job in the products they built and the way they went about the market, and having them in the market made us a better company. It made me a better CEO. I had to try harder, and I had to think differently. So their presence was welcome. It was a help for everybody, us included. So no, I don't think that it's necessarily a correct idea that competition should invoke negative emotions or that it should somehow have some negative psychological effect. I think it's positive, and it gets the best out of everybody.
It's well put. So you ended up selling to PayPal for $800 million. Why did you sell, and why then?
I mean, this is going back to my overall thinking. I was 34 years old at the time, so I was 4 years late on the goal, and I'd become keenly interested in the concept of compounded gains. I referenced people who had been building a given thing for 20, 30, 40 years of their life. And compounded gains is the eighth wonder of the world. And, I had skipped around in many different businesses and many different industries. I touched 6 or 7 different industries. And every time you get into a new industry, you have to learn it, and it takes time. And it was time for me to pursue my life ambition. And I figured I was probably going to have one go. So if I sold Braintree, it was probably going to take me anywhere between 2 and 7 years to figure out what to do, because selecting that given thing was going to require a few decades of work. And so choosing the wrong thing would have significant consequences. And so being 34 years old and knowing that I wanted to build for a few decades, it was just time for me to get going. And especially trying to think through something as nuanced as, like, if you could choose one lever to try to bring about some kind of value creation for the human race, or for all intelligent life, for that matter, what do you do? And so it was just time for me. And wealth accumulation was not an end point in and of itself. I just needed enough to get started. And the few $100 million I made from the acquisition was enough to get started.
So let's talk about that few $100 million. Do you remember the day when the deal closed and that wire hit your account? And what did you feel the level of happiness or gratification that you were hoping you would?
Interestingly, my depression didn't clear until a few years after Braintree. I mean, I was still in the trenches of at-home problems, of religion, trying to extricate myself from that. So it basically, that moment was met with total I couldn't feel anything.
Got it. If you don't mind me asking, Brian, how in the world were you able to still run the company as an effective CEO under such a dark cloud for several years?
You just figure it out, like I don't know if I can even articulate it. You make the psychological tricks that allow you to do what you need to get done, and you kind of mute your pain. And that's what I think I'd done. And I think I just kind of I tried to, and I think fairly effectively just muted my emotions and just went after it.
Do you find yourself still muting emotions today?
No, it's interesting when I was going through my depressive endeavors. I tried literally everything known to man to try to fix it, like everything. And it was only after ending, the relationship, my marriage, and leaving the Mormon church, that my depression just vanished. And I didn't expect that to be the sequence of events. And since that's been the case in my life, it's not come back. And so no, it really cleaned up a few years subsequent to the acquisition. And I'm a different human than I was before. Different foundation, different thought processes, different emotional structure.
Got it. On the topic of money, one last question, and then we're going to move off Braintree and what you're working on now and building today. A founder in the audience is asking, do you think that by de-risking, by taking money off the table, pardon me, with that first round that Excel had led for you, when you took money off the table, did that help you do your job better as a CEO or help you get to the finish line better because you were able to do that?
On questions like this, I have zero trust in my brain to be able to generate an accurate response. Anything I would answer to that question would be entirely made up, most likely in a unknown way to benefit myself and the way others perceive me. I have no clue. And I think that's one of the things I've learned in my life is every thought that drops into my brain by default, I just need to figure out just how, in what ways it's wrong. Not if it's wrong, but just like in how many degrees, how severe is it? So I think any question, and I think an attempted response on my side would be misleading and inaccurate.
Perfectly fine. But now you're a VC. Now you have skin in the game on the other side of the table. So when you're investing in a startup, and let's say at the Series B, the founders all want to take $1 million off the table, what is your initial reaction to that?
Well, you have to look at each individual, and there's no rules. So, what do they grow up with? Do they have debt? To whom? What's their living preferred lifestyles? Do they need money to impress someone else? Like it's so contextually based that I don't think there are general rules that can be made. I know that people try to make a very clean heuristic, like yes or no, but it's not. It's nuanced. And so, like some people want the money because their mom lives. I have a friend. Their mom lives in poverty. And it's like he wants to help her not live in poverty. So that certainly doesn't change his motivation set. So I think it's really nuanced.
Got it. That makes sense. So after the sale, you took $200 million of your own money and you start OS Fund. What problems were you envisioning that you could help solve with OS Fund?
Yeah. The human race has done a wonderful job building tools around software. This idea that we can program computers to do highly useful things in our existence. And so when any given problem arises in the world, we now have a capacity as a species that millions of software engineers can be deployed to solve that given problem if it can be solved by software. But what we don't have as a species is the ability to do that same thing with the physical elements that make us, atoms, molecules, organisms, complex systems. And so what I wanted to do was replicate what we had done in software as a species to what we could do with the physical elements of our reality. And so if you take any given problem, you say, okay, we've lost X% of the coral reef due to environmental changes in the ocean. How do you rebuild a coral reef? The first conclusion is not let's build software. Right? You have to look at a physical element of like what is coral and what are the chemicals that are associated and what are the ecosystem. And so I started investing in companies doing synthetic biology, nanotechnology, enzyme development that were building platforms that allowed the scaffolding of these basic elements of our existence. So that if a problem arose in the world, which is we have an endless number of problems relating to the physical elements, that we had the same capabilities where you had the platforms that could enable it, and you had millions of people who knew how to do it. And it was oriented around this idea around climate change, that we need to have robust abilities to deal with our physical environment for new materials, for abundance of resources. It just is at the core. And the problem I was trying to solve is, for good reasons, venture capital funds stuff that makes money and that they can be highly certain to make money. And funding these more scientific endeavors is a little bit nuanced. It's not as straightforward as funding a software company that's a lot more mature. And so I wanted to build out a model and say, you can do this. Like, you actually can deploy capital in a productive way. And it's been, we invested, I think, in 27 or so companies. Like, one of them is, for example, Ginkgo Bioworks. They've become one of the most prominent and value creative companies in the world in synthetic biology, worth billions of dollars now. And I was first professional money in on that. And so I think several companies like that, good examples of people building the scaffolding for things we critically need across the world.
And you're investing in, it sounds very lofty in terms of like the missions that these companies are at, but you are investing, expecting or shooting for a return on your investment. Is that right?
Of course. The whole objective here is it needs to be done in a way where others want to do it as well. And if it's set up as a foundation or nonprofit, that's a different set of money. If people can make money doing that, you're going to pull more capital in. So the idea was to get as much capital in the game as possible.
Got it. Very good. Is OS Fund still making investments, new investments?
We are contemplating whether to do another fund or not.
Got it.
That would require raising outside capital. Different game.
Got it. That is a different game for sure. That brings us up to Kernel. And for those that want to check it out, Kernel, spelled just like it sounds, a kernel of a popcorn, kernel.co. You call it neuroscience as a service. What problem are you trying to solve with Kernel, and who are your customers exactly?
Almost everything in the known universe can be measured. We can measure black holes. We can track our steps. We can look at calories. We can measure our cholesterol levels. One of the only things we cannot consistently quantify is our brain and our minds. If you think about that, and our brain and minds, of course, it's an emergent phenomena from a whole bunch of things like our genes and our hormones, et cetera, but that we don't have access to the thing that makes us us, and the thing that is deciding other things, to me, seems like one of the highest value things we could ever do as a species. Because if we can reduce, so it's like, think of it through like the effort gap. If you want to understand the nutritional data of what you're eating, you look at the label. If you want to have your temperature taken, you use a thermometer. If you want your brain scanned or have information insight into your brain, unless you're going to the ER, best case scenario, a few weeks. And it's actually ridiculous because it's like, imagine going to the cardiologist, and the cardiologist asks you, hey, Casey, how's your heart? And you say, hold tight, let me check. Think I'm good, right? We would say that's absurd. Like, let's do an EKG, let's do a blood panel, let's quantify my heart because I really can't feel anything. But that's how we treat our brain today. Right? It's like, how's your brain? Well, let me think about it. I don't know, kind of feel depressed a little bit, maybe a little anxious. But like, it's just kind of an absurd situation. We don't have the ability to quantify our brain. So just as a basic function, getting baseline quantification of what's happening in our brain and making it easy. Number two is, this goes back to the conclusion I made, which is, what is one thing I could do that would create the most benefit for the human race? And it's basically getting access to our brains, converting that time series data into language like numbers and math that then can be paired up with machine learning. And now you have the most powerful and robust evolutionary system ever built. And that cannot be understated. It is a function change for intelligent life. And the brain interface technologies that exist today, they're great in certain contexts, but they're oftentimes large machines in constrained environments, and or technologies easy to put on, but not high enough neural fidelity. And so there hasn't been a moment where brain interface technology has reached a level of accessibility, quality, and price that it could be deployed society-wide, and that we now understand we have a neural-inspired and neural-quantified world. And so the objective at Kernel is that we will through that limitation, and that the brain and mind will become the central platform of development of the next decade, in following the smartphone being that of the past decade. That we as a society become intensely interested in the operation of our minds and our brains, not just through self-introspection, but through the quantified nature that technology allows us to do that.
Well, there you have it, folks. You came to a SaaS conference having no idea you were going to get so motivated by brain technology as you are today. But all somebody has to do is spend 3 minutes listening to Brian Johnson talking about brain technology, and it's tough not to get pumped about that. So who are you serving, or who are you selling the technology to?
Initially, it will be experts in the technology domains that are accustomed to these technologies, but then we're doing everything we can. So just like Braintree and Venmo, the objective was to reduce friction at every point. So if you and I want to exchange money, what is the fastest, lowest effort thing we have to do to exchange money? Or if you buy something from a website. So it's all about friction reduction for everybody. And the same thing is true for access to the brain, is how do you eliminate access or eliminate friction on every point, from me getting an interface on my head to a developer having API list, et cetera, et cetera. How do we make neural data and our brain and our minds ubiquitous in society in our technological infrastructure?
Amazing. And if anyone's interested, Kernel's hiring for data scientists and engineers, you can check out their career site. Brian, thank you so much for taking us down this amazing journey of yours. And I'm excited for the second part of this journey of yours with Kernel. And if anyone wants to learn more, they can check out more on Brian on Twitter. I'll post his Twitter handle here. Feel free to give him a shout out, thanking him for his time today. Feel free to also just ask him anything you want. I'm sure he'll find time to respond to you. But once again, thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate your time today. And I know everyone in the audience and everyone's going to be listening and watching this afterwards appreciates your time, appreciates your candor, and appreciates all the hard stones that you're trying to push up mountains for the good of our society and culture. Thank you so much, Brian.
Thanks, Casey.
All right, thanks. So, Brian, you just close your cam and close your mic, and you'll just essentially leave.
See you. Thanks again.
All right, cool. All right. Wow, guys, wow. Let me know what you thought in the chat. This is a very different type of talk than perhaps 5 ways to acquire customers. So, love to hear what your thoughts are about the different topics that we covered with this. Before our next break, I want to bring up Derek for a couple minutes, because I want you to learn about Vital Traffic Labs, who is a first-time sponsor this year. Derek, welcome to the stage.
Hey, Casey. Nice to be here.
Likewise. I'm glad you're here. So
yeah, very excited. It wasn't too long to where we were in the virtual stage or in the physical stage a couple
Yeah.
of years ago. Yeah. So
This day would come. This day would come.
yeah.
So
pretty
Vital
awesome.
Traffic Labs. So Vital Traffic Lab. You're one of the two co-founders of Vital Traffic Labs.
Yeah.
What problems do you help startups solve?
Yeah. So we, in a nutshell, we really are a revenue growth engine for SaaS companies, InfoSec, AI, machine learning, really technology-enabled companies that are extremely good at what they do, but need that additional support when it comes to who to speak with, how to get more customers in a quick and effective manner. We've helped companies really shorten the timeline from acquisition and had them acquired by some major companies like Juniper, Splunk, IBM, Checkpoint. We really love working with technology-based startups, and really if that's a pre-seed company all the way to we've just recently onboarded a unicorn company valued over $1 billion in revenue. So our process works extremely well for all stages of business when it comes to startup technologies. And it's just really great to help them grow, because I think, a lot of technology-based companies, like we talked about with, like TK said, you're only one feature away, or, you're really focused on that next product set, when really things that can be growing your organization is strategic conversations. So that's what we try to broker and foster at VTL, and really help put these startups in a better position to either get more funding, get more revenue, or acquire more customers.
Cool. So let's talk about customers. The situation that I hear the most about founders, and we're talking like, let's say 3 co-founders, right? And they don't really have a sales team. They don't have a VP of sales. They're still a year or 2 away from that. It's like, I'm great at selling my product. I'm awesome. If I can get somebody on a live demo, like nobody can display the value better than me, right? Or if I can get somebody on a phone call, nobody can get them to buy better than me. I just need more interest. I need more inbound. I need more people emailing me and contacting me. Is that something Vital Traffic Labs helps with? And so what does that look like?
Yeah, exactly. And, most of the founders that we talk to, that's exactly the sentiment that we're hearing as well. They're extremely good. They understand their product. If they can just get it in front of the right people, they'll understand the value and move forward. And that's really where Vital Traffic Labs comes into play. We really help with that top of funnel. I think a lot of founders, they make the mistake of maybe trying to bring on a high-level VP of sales that maybe came from, an Oracle or these large companies, and they think that that's the move to make. But really it's getting them in front of the right people so they can show what their product or service can offer. A lot of times we're just focused on building our products in a vacuum, or, in a theory tank, so to speak, when really it's the market that you need to get in front of. And we shortcut that timeline so you can actually be having those conversations. Perfect example, we're working with a deployment company that's really automating that whole process. And they've got a lot of brilliant engineers, great couple co-founders, and really their whole business model completely changed after a few strategic conversations. And they've gone back to the drawing board, revamped their product, and now they're working with some amazing businesses. So I think it's a mistake early on to focus too much on the feature sets before you get into the marketplace and actually understand that real-time feedback that's so crucial to the growth of a company.
Totally agree. And to what Derek said, do not go out and hire your VP of sales from Oracle. Nothing will waste time and money for an early stage startup, a startup of, let's say, under 10 million in revenue, than going out and thinking that getting a salesperson from a big co is somehow going to be your silver bullet. It's not. So Derek, what does your pricing model look like, and how do you exactly work with startups in terms of that? What should they be expected to pay for, and what does the first couple months look like when they would start working with you?
Yeah, great question. Our pricing model is very advantageous for a lot of companies. What we price ourselves for a early stage startup to these unicorn clients, it's very similar. We do just flat fee engagements, so we can really not be pulling revenue from the business, but providing revenue. And what it would look like with working with VTL is really identifying that persona. Things that TK talked about within his presentation, I think definitely resonated. Who is the market? What is that persona? These are the things that we want to identify quickly. and really put together a message that's going to resonate with them. I think so many times we've all been hit with these LinkedIn messages or emails, and it's just a laundry list of value props about, why your SaaS product is so great, all the problems you solved, and you've never even gained a connection with the person or gained some common ground. So we really take more of an empathetic approach to understand who your customers are. So I think that persona piece is a huge, huge component of what we bring to the table. And then once we understand that, we can very much unlock the motivating factors of your end buyer and ultimately motivate them to have conversations with you and take that next step of just having a demo or checking out your product. These are all such crucial things that really help expedite the growth of a company. A founder that we were working with, he had essentially exited, I think, 3 companies at this point before he hired BTL. And I think he put it quite well, where he said, really, I'm just expediting that timeline from start to acquisition, where normally it takes 3 years and I'm getting offers within 8 months of starting the company. So, those conversations are key. And that's really what BTL provides, is that top of funnel traffic and allow you to sell your product to your best capabilities.
Cool. Well, there you have it, founders. If you want more leads on the top of your funnel, you want more of the people that should be buying from you to have conversations with you, reach out to VTL. Their link is in the chat box there. Reach out, have a conversation with either Derek or his co-founder David, who both, by the way, come from this industry. They have walked their talk for many, many years before they now start doing it for clients and for startups. So reach out to them, have a conversation. Get your pipeline 2, 3, 4 times bigger than what it once was. And it's not going to happen by magic. It'll happen by working with somebody that knows what levers to pull behind the scenes to help you fill that funnel. So thank you so much, Derek, for being with us today. Thank you for being a sponsor of Enterprise Rising. Give a shout out to Vital Traffic Labs on Twitter or LinkedIn, please. Without them, there would be no conference. So thank you so much, Derek. Appreciate you being here.
Yeah, we'll be on the rooftop if you want to chat with myself or David, and happy to connect.
Awesome. There you go. All right.
Thanks,
See you guys.
Bye.
All right, hang tight, guys. Hold on. I think my battery's dying here. Hang tight. We've got Anna Tellerico on the topic of sales, which is going to be pretty awesome. She does nothing but spend time with startups in general, but also the entire portfolio of Arthur Ventures. So if you're not familiar with Arthur Ventures, incredibly well-known VC fund, at least in B2B SaaS, because that's all they invest in. They are split between Fargo, which is where they were actually located, and Minneapolis, which is where a majority of the team is, although the team is all over the place. And Anna actually steps in, and once a company is funded by Arthur Ventures, helps the CEOs, helps the founders start building out certain functions, including sales, marketing, and customer success. So she knows the constraints and the trade-offs that every single founder has to make in between time and money and everything else that goes into hiring and building out a team. But first, before we do that, I want to bring up Tamar. Where are you, Tamar? Here you are. And guys, the reason I'm bringing sponsors up on Virtual Stage, which is something that most conferences don't do, is because I want you to put a face to the name. Every single sponsor that has been picked by me, because they are handpicked, nobody can just throw money at me and become a sponsor. So every sponsor handpicked is because I know or suspect that because of the stage that you're at right now, you will need them in the next year or two. Okay. Like if you're on a good trajectory, you will inevitably bump up against walls where you want to save time, you want to save energy, you want to save money, and you want to save making a lot of mistakes. And you will want to know who these people are and save time because you now know who to reach out to. So I want to welcome to the stage Tamar Ribnick from HGA, which is an architecture firm. Are you guys headquartered here?
We are headquartered here. We have a few offices all over the country, but our main office is local.
You are in Ford Center and here in Minneapolis, for those that know Minneapolis, which is also home of When I Work, who has pretty rad offices themselves. Chad, CEO, founder, not CEO anymore, but founder of When I Work, is here today somewhere. And thank you for being a sponsor, Tamar. And you guys have worked with, you guys have as clients lots of tech companies, right? All around the country.
Yeah, we have quite a few. So locally we have, Lead Pages, Arctic Wolf, Vienna Hale, and then we have a large California presence, or with Elementum, Will, Uyala, a bunch of the large startups and small ones. So it really, HGA, we're a large architecture firm, but I'll say my sweet spot, and we kind of have these little sectors within the company, is specifically with tech companies and workplace. And that's because you guys are your own animal, if you will, right? Have your own totally different, you're not a law firm, right?
That's really true. That's true. And that's true. I might add, just for all the founders in the audience, it's true of virtually any service firm. One of the very first questions out of your mouth when you're conversing with them is, can you tell me a handful of startups that you've worked with in the past? And if they name like Salesforce and Slack, like, you might have a problem, because these aren't really startups, and they probably don't know how to interact with you. They don't have like a good framework for like how to actually get things done with a startup. They're used to working with huge corporations, with huge budgets, with somebody at the company that like can focus on this 100%. So it's a good question. It's a very good filter, I might add. And the fact that you guys have delineated different teams to work with tech companies is awesome, and that's necessary.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Casey, because I feel, there's so many companies when you're larger, what you need, you've probably even been through it before, right? Maybe had a smaller office, moving up to a larger space and a larger, but when you're a startup, by the time you need space, you needed it 6 months ago, and it's maybe a smaller square footage, or you've never done this before. And so you need someone to help you along. And so I think that's where, to your point, just us having this separate niche dedicated to really understanding those needs, as opposed to saying, oh, you must be like, LinkedIn, it's fine, we got this, we've done this before. It's totally different.
And so I know there's probably some founders right now listening to this being like, an architect, like I'm trying to get to like 10,000 a month, 10,000 MRR. Like, how in the world am I going to need an architect anytime soon? But here's the skinny. I'll just rehash a conversation that I had with a founder not too long ago, which is that they're growing fast, and they are right now at WeWork, and it's been amazing for them, and it's exactly what they need. And they could keep working within WeWork and keep growing to like 50, 60, 80 headcount, or at some point they could think about just getting their own office. And when you get your own office, you all of a sudden have a blank slate. You have a blank canvas in which you can do almost anything you want. And if you care deeply about continuing to build a bigger and bigger team, then you need to start making some very hard decisions and drawing a line in the sand of like, how is this company going to operate? Like, what is being in the office actually like once we are in the office again?
Especially
like,
these days, right?
How is HQ of my startup going to look and feel? And then that's where you bring in Tamar. So even though a lot of you are like, man, that feels like a million miles off for me, there might very well be a day. This is especially true if you suspect or know you're going to raise money someday, and you get to a point where you have the leverage to raise, let's say, a $12 million Series A. $12 million Series A means that you're going to hire 20 to 50 people in the next 18 months. And so with that kind of headcount growth, you need to start thinking about this kind of stuff. Not right now, but at that time, you'll start thinking about this, and you'll want to reach out to Tamar. So Tamar, if a startup is thinking to themselves like, hey, we're probably going to get our first real office, sometime in the next year and a half, how early should they reach out to you? How early does it make sense for them to like start a conversation with you?
Honestly, as soon as you start thinking about the idea that we're going to need physical space, just talk. It never hurts to talk. I mean, that's how I am. I'm just a firm believer. It never hurts to have the conversation, right? And I think, you don't know what you don't know. So have a conversation. Let's see, what are your needs? And quite honestly, we could just spitball and say, hey, realistically, like, what could this space begin to look like? Who do you need to begin talking to, what brokers, and just fostering that relationship, start thinking about what workplace means to you, so that what's going to happen is, in a year when you need that space, you're not going to have the time to start asking those questions and thinking about that kind of thing. So asking those as soon as you're starting to think about space, give me a call. We can at least just talk about what a workplace could be for you, what those ideas could transform into. We have those conversations going so that the moment you're ready to hit go, we're not taking the time to say, okay, we're not taking that get to know you time. It's already done, and we can just move into action. And quite honestly, what I think tech companies get that other companies really don't get is the importance of brand, the importance of story. And that can be articulated into your workspace. Your employees would be engaged with that. Clients, it doesn't matter who you're serving. We all know that matters. And so again, learning who you are early will make your space that much better, because we believe we're not just creating an office, we're creating a branded environment for you. So for me, it's like I said, I love meeting new people. I love having the conversation. It never hurts to give me a call, and we can just see where you're at and how we can help.
Awesome. Love it. And I can attest to, for founders, that anything around office or getting office space can become a massive time suck and a big distraction suck. And so the point is that, and the point of me bringing in sponsors like Tamar and HEA is that you can hit the ground running. You're not wasting a lot of time trying to figure out who to reach out to. You're not wasting time reaching out to many service providers and trying to interview 3 or 4 to try to figure out who seems like the best fit for you. You're not wasting time on things that are much higher leverage, like making real decisions. And so all things around even leasing your office can easily become a time suck, which is partially why Eddie Reimer is a sponsor of this conference. He's here somewhere running around or sitting around in one of the virtual chairs. So this is a very key sponsorship that I'm happy to bring to all you guys, and a relationship that I hope you guys keep in mind. At the very least, reach out to Tamar somehow, some way, and stay connected to her, so that if and when the day comes when all of a sudden you guys hit a magical headcount of 10 or 15 or 20 or 25, when all of a sudden it makes sense to have an office, you don't have to waste a bunch of time stumbling around in the dark trying to figure out what your next steps are. You can reach out to Tamar and jump on a Zoom call or jump on a coffee if we're back to normal. And I know that I know with me, she's very generous with her time and her thoughts and her advice. So I have no doubt that she will be with founders as well.
Absolutely.
So Tamar, thank you so much for being a sponsor. Thanks for being here today, and I hope you can hang out a little bit longer today, even though I'm sure you have a ton of client work to catch up on. And feel free to reach out to Tamar or just hga.com. Is that the
yeah.
If you want to take a look at other, as a tough one to remember. If you just want to look around to like other portfolio companies that they have, just for inspiration, you can go to hga.com.
Absolutely. And always reach out to me, like I said. Thank you so much, Casey.
Awesome. Thanks. All right, everyone, hang tight. Let's see here. We've got Anna in the house. Let me find Anna and bring her up on stage, because she is going to blow your minds with all kinds of good stuff that you will need to know. Anna, welcome to the stage.
Thank you so much. No pressure now that I'm going to blow everybody's minds.
It's good. I mean, this is I'm really excited for your talk, because this is a lot of what you're going to distill is really tough to learn from a blog post, or to even package into a blog post written by somebody else. So Anna's going to, this is really going out to founders who know they're going to start making their first couple key sales hires sometime in the next year and a half. This might be because you're in the middle of raising a seed round, and with that you're going to make 2 or 3 sales hires, or if you're gearing up for a Series A, in which case you're going to make probably way more sales hire in a really short amount of time. This is your chance to learn from somebody that does nothing but work with B2B SaaS companies all day, every day, to learn what kind of playbooks she's sharing with them that you can apply for your own. So without further ado, let's get in the trenches and let's talk shop, Anna?
Yay, yes, let's do it.
Yeah.
All right.
You can share your screen, and I'm going to go invisible. I'm still
Okay.
here, and I'll just pop back in and out as I need.
Can you
to,
see my screen?
Yes,
Okay.
perfect. Building the early.
Yay. Okay.
Yep.
Well, when Casey said, "Hey, do you want to do a session on building the early sales team?" I was like, "Yes, that's what I spend all day talking about. It's what I love to do." But then I was like, early stage could be as a founder selling with no employees yet. It could be somebody that's already got 5 or 6 salespeople on the team. So hopefully there's something for everybody in this presentation. If you're just going to be hiring your first sales account executive, or you're already starting to scale the team. Really quickly, Casey mentioned, I'm Anna Tallarico. I'm an operating partner at Arthur Ventures. We do early stage, growth stage investing in B2B companies outside of Silicon Valley. And before this, I've been an entrepreneur and a SaaS operator sort of all of my life, always in go-to-market and always leading the sales team. So I am really passionate about building and growing sales teams. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can find me, probably Twitter's the best place, at Anna Tallarico. But let's jump in. When I think about the early stage sales team and sort of that 1 to 10 million stage, let's say 1 to 10 million in ARR, I think about it kind of in 4 stages. And initially it's just the founder is usually selling, or an early stage employee that's kind of sitting next to the founder if we have a technical founder who doesn't want to sell. But it's really, founder is sort of what we typically see, and maybe there's 1 to 3 people, but it's really easy to manage and it starts to work. We're selling, we've got our first 10 customers, we've got our first X number of customers, and you start as the founder or that early salesperson, you start to see the path to growth. And then the next stage is when we screw everything up because we start to grow the sales team. And for every sort of 2 steps forward we take, we end up taking 1 step back. So we're going to spend all of our time here today on this screwing up stage. But then we start to get our footing. We've made a lot of mistakes. Now we start to actually know what works, and we start to document and repeat. And that's when we get into nirvana, which is this kind of repeatable motion where we can actually scale. So what we want to try and do, of course, is minimize that messy middle in between when we just start to build out the sales team, and it just feels like everything we're doing is wrong. But that I will say that everybody makes mistakes, and this slide originally had like 20 things listed on it, and the type was really small because there's just, when you haven't built a sales team before, it's sort of every decision can be more challenging than it needs to be, and it's just a learning experience. So we hire the wrong people in the wrong roles. We don't really have a plan or metrics. We kind of skip some sales fundamentals, or might not even know the sales fundamentals if we've never led a sales team or built a sales team before. Just because you're a founder who can sell doesn't necessarily mean instantly you're going to transfer over those skills and build a world-class sales team. And so we do things like we don't create playbooks or hold the team accountable. And then a big one I see is not using advisors and mentors. When I think back to all the mistakes I made when I built my first sales team, I was very much an accidental sales leader. And I think the biggest mistake I made was not using advisors and mentors. And as soon as I started to work with people who'd been there before or could offer me advice or just guardrails, that really was sort of pretty transformative for me personally. So I think that's a big one as well. So we all make mistakes. Let's not focus on that. What do we need to do to build the early sales team? Number 1, we need to hire the right people. Number 2, we need to set those people up for success. We need to hold them accountable, which is a big one. And we need to be a good leader. Whether you're going to personally, as a founder, lead the sales team, or whether you're going to have somebody leading the sales team, we still need to understand sales fundamentals so that we can build and grow a great team that delivers results. So just these 4 simple things, that's it. And we're going to spend some time on each of them today. Hiring the right people. I could probably spend a day or 2 weeks talking about hiring the right people, because it's the most important thing you can do in an early stage, whether you're hiring your first salesperson or you're hiring your fifth. And it's the thing that is the most difficult to get right. So there's two pieces of that. And I'm going to actually spend a lot of time here today on this one. The first one is relatively straightforward, but it happens. And that is just not having clarity on the roles. And we kind of can overcomplicate it. So there are only a few roles that really matter in an early stage sales team. And that's an account executive who's selling, right? They have a quota, they're bringing in the new revenue. There may be sales development representatives that would have called SDRs, or sometimes they're called BDRs, business development representatives, and they are responsible for booking qualified appointments for account executives. And then later, as we start to grow, we have some AEs and maybe some SDRs. We might have sales operations running our tech stack and kind of blocking and tackling and making it easier for the sales team to sell. And then we might need a sales engineer. If we're truly enterprise, we probably do. And then even a little bit later, we might need a contract manager. But we don't need a lot of crazy segmentation, and we certainly don't need all of these roles in the beginning. But sometimes people say, I'm ready to scale the sales team, but they don't really have an idea of like what role to hire. So it's really important before you do any hiring or any hiring plan or adding to, that you really understand what role you're hiring for, because that's how we're going to hold them accountable and give them quota and things like that. So it's not uncommon for a founder to say to me, I'm going to hire my first account executive. And then when we start to talk through what they're going to have that account executive doing, it's actually something quite different. Maybe they're going to be managing the accounts on an ongoing basis. So they're also providing support and service. Maybe they're going to be booking their own appointments, calling 100 leads a day. It's really hard to be an account executive booking new revenue if you're doing that too. So all of that's fine, but you need to be really clear on what you need and what you're hiring, and then what you can expect from them. But if we think about kind of the stages that we need, and I just really focused on the sort of 1 to 10 million in ARR, initially we just need a founder or an early stage employee who's selling. And as we start to get some traction, then we might have 1 or 2 account executives or SDRs. And so it's not much more than that, right? And depending on how enterprise you are, it really kind of depends on, do you need extra AEs, right? If your average contract value is 500,000, and for, 500,000 in ARR, you just probably need 1 AE in that first early sort of 1 to 2 million in ARR stage. But then as we start to scale, we now might need a sales leader, or the founder is going to start to need to lead an actual team. And then that's when we get into a couple of AEs, couple of SDRs perhaps, maybe sales operations. Sales operations in the beginning is really like a chief of staff for the sales department. And this role cannot be overestimated how important this role is. This can run the tech stack. So when we talk about that in a little bit, but your CRM, any cadence tools you're using, they can be really instrumental in training and onboarding new team members. And there can be really helpful as well in making sure that the leads are flowing to sales, which is something that often breaks at this stage, right? We have salespeople sitting in seats, but we don't have leads going to them, or we don't have enough tools to help the salespeople get leads. So sales operations really make sure that everybody has enough leads to follow up on and that they're following up with them. So that kind of role becomes really important towards the middle stage, right? So maybe 5 million in ARR. And then as we really grow, we start to see we might need a sales engineer if we're truly enterprise. We might need, we've got the sales ops. We might start to need a contract manager. So if you're doing, master service agreements with every enterprise B2B customer, and you're not having them sign your terms and conditions, that can be an area that really starts to be slowing down deal velocity. If you've got 5 to 6 contracts in flight at any one time, which you might have around that sort of 8 to 10 million in ARR stage, it can be really helpful to accelerating deal velocity to have a contract manager in place at this, especially for enterprise B2B. And it kind of pays for itself because of the time that you spend just sort of not using a not using an external lawyer, or the time that is accelerated just in sort of turning around red lines and things like that. It also helps mitigate risk. When you're selling to the enterprise, there's lots of terms and conditions that they want you to agree to, and a contract manager just kind of helps keep their arms around all of that and sort of looks at a risk portfolio that you're agreeing to, limitation of liability and all sorts of things like that, that they can kind of help balance out. And usually too, if you're selling to the enterprise and you're SaaS, you're also having to do things like security assessments. A contract manager can also manage that whole process. So they are really like deal accelerators, and can be super cost effective. So again, that's usually, I've even seen that role sometimes at like 7 million in ARR, but that's down the line. So this is kind of just being clear about who you need to hire and when, and planning it ahead. But the biggest mistake is not so much roles, that's one, but the bigger issue is when we hire the wrong people. And so when I think about how do we as startups hire the right people, the thing that I use without fail is a candidate scoring matrix. And so I'm putting every candidate through a scoring and evaluating them. And it's pretty simple. Usually I don't do it like weighted or anything like that. And on score. And that takes out the bias. It's very helpful with that, but it also helps ensure that we don't fall in love with a candidate. When you're hiring and you haven't hired a lot of salespeople before, they're salespeople. They're, potentially really good at the interview process. It doesn't mean that they are going to be great after the interview process. So it's really important to kind of come up with a scoring matrix and then to use that and to be more objective about who you're hiring. And this is so important. I actually pulled up a sample scoring matrix from a startup. They were hiring their first salesperson, and this was the matrix that we came up with. So a candidate could have a total highest score of 17. And all of these things were important to finding the exact right person for that, sort of salesperson number one. And this was an enterprise e-commerce platform, e-commerce shopping cart kind of platform. But I'm going to spend a few minutes here to talk through these because a lot of the things on their candidate scoring matrix were things I recommend all startups that are starting to build the sales team include in their candidate scoring matrices. So although it's good, we're going to spend a little time here, it's worth it for you to be thinking about who do you need to hire, right? So if we're talking about salesperson one, or even those first, let's say those first 3 or 4 salespeople, we want somebody that is kind of independently, had a quota bearing sales role before. Ideally, the first sales rep, maybe 10 years. As you start to get rep 2 and 3 and 4, maybe that's a 5-year experience level in a quota bearing sales role. That means they have had a number that they've had to hit, and that they've been hitting it, right? So consistently meeting or exceeding quota in a variety of work environments. It is okay to ask somebody to prove that to you. In sales, some candidate can say that they have hit quota before, but it is okay in sales to actually ask that they show you wages and things, pay stubs and things like that to kind of show you that they have indeed been meeting quota. You can also ask for references that would attest to that too. Mid to enterprise sales, certainly a candidate scoring matrix criteria that's important. Comfortable with contract values in excess of whatever your contract value is, navigated independently, understanding the complex sales cycle and process. In this case, we had an e-commerce platform, so deep expertise and fluency in that space was really important. This company had professional services, so somebody who'd sold both was really important. And I'm not going to keep going here, but you can kind of see, remote work experiences was a fully distributed company, small company. They were 5 people. The founder had been selling, and now employee number 6 was going to be their salesperson. So they wanted somebody who had worked remotely before. This was before everybody was working remotely. Number 10 here is super important too, but experience in a startup or a small company. I think the biggest mistake that startups make is hiring somebody that's only got large company experience, because selling in a large company is fundamentally different than selling in a small company. In a small company, we have to make up a lot as we go along. We don't have all the resources and tools that we always need. And there's a lot of like just changes and modifications to what we're doing, our talk tracks, our messaging, like we're just figuring all that stuff out. And somebody who's worked in a small company before has fluency and agility to be comfortable with that, right? A large organization sales rep usually is not used to that amount of change and the pace at which things change, and they're used to sort of just a more structured way to sell. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what you're going to be as you grow and scale. When you hit 10 million in ARR or 50 million in ARR, you're going to have a really structured way to sell too. So there's nothing wrong with those types of candidates. They can bring a lot of value to the organization, but they don't fit typically in a small startup. So it's important to have somebody that's really comfortable in that type of environment. And then the other thing for startups is just somebody who's comfortable working autonomously, right? They don't need a lot of oversight for their responsibilities. So that's it. You're going to come up with your matrix, and then you're going to score people, and you're going to hire based on score. And that is the number one most important way to make sure that you're finding the right people. And then in the scoring matrix, there's a couple things that you want to think about, which is like your pass-fail criteria, meaning maybe they score a 16, but they failed that 17th thing. So every company has their own pass-fail criteria, just like your own scoring criteria, right? Like I showed you that sample on the previous slide of the 17 criteria, just to show you that you need to be deeply thoughtful and exhaustive in thinking through your ideal candidates. But this pass-fail is super important. Like my personal pass-fail when I'm interviewing anybody for a sales role is curiosity. And if they don't display deep, innate, natural curiosity, no matter what they score, I don't hire them, because I've just personally, in my experience, found that that is a key indicator of success. That doesn't need to be your pass-fail criteria. Maybe it's that they have early stage experience, or that they have industry experience, or that they've sold your average contract value before. So you just need to kind of think about what's your pass-fail and then stick to it, right? As painful as it might be. You might fall in love with the perfect candidate, but they don't have early stage experience. So as painful as it might be to walk away from them, you've got to like honor the pass-fail that you come up with. It's super important. And when you do that, you'll nurture those people. You'll bring them in later when it's the right time. This last bullet here about being a builder versus a maintainer is also really important. You need to know who you're hiring. Are you hiring somebody to build the sales team? Are you hiring somebody to execute your existing playbook? Because that can be a big detriment to hiring early stage, is getting the wrong it's like getting a square peg in a round hole, right? So if you've got somebody who has maybe, let's say you're hiring your first sales leader and they have run a team of 20, but they didn't build that team, that's probably not the right fit for you, right? Because they might not know how to build that team. They might know how to run a 20-person sales organization. That doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to build it. So I always say, before I start hiring for anybody, do I need a builder or do I need a maintainer? I've heard this, there's lots of different phrases for this, and I think it's actually important across the whole organization, not just for sales, but I've heard it called, just recently somebody called it, do you need a barrel or a bullet, right? So meaning a barrel, they make the path, and then a bullet follows the path. So either way, across the organization for startup hiring, I think this is really important, because you can get people that seem really well qualified, but they might have just been running something versus knowing how to build it, and that's a big one. So that's the other thing. One last thing on getting the right people, hiring the right people, is making sure that you're using a repeatable recruiting process. This applies even if you're about to just hire your first salesperson, right? If you're about to hire your first salesperson, don't think everything I just talked about is overkill for you, because you are going to probably interview 5 people, 10 people, two people, however it is, you need a way to kind of assess them and benchmark them against each other. And then you want to make sure that every candidate goes through the same process. So although I know like to have too big of a process in the early stage, I still need a process. So in enterprise sales recruiting, it's usually a process like a phone screen. That's going to be 3 to 5 questions. Screen for my personal thing is I'm screening for curiosity, and I'm just trying to weed out the crazies. So that might be a 15-minute call that I'm doing, or 15 to 30-minute call. Then we move on to interview 1, 10 to 12 questions. I continue to emphasis on curiosity. The best kinds of interviews for interview 1 is when the sales candidate is interviewing you about. They have just innate curiosity about your market, about your product, about your buyers, about your sales cycle, about the deals you've closed, the deals you've lost, etc. So those are the most exciting interviews, is when the candidates are so curious that they're really, it feels like they're interviewing you in a way. But then the sort of next phase is more questioning. You might be including others in the process, just as sounding boards or to get some advice, input. And then usually for enterprise sales reps, there's going to be a demo or a presentation, or if it's an SDR, there might be a role play, something to just get a sense of how do they think on their feet, what is their thinking process like, you know, when you ask them to do something and then they come back with an output, what is that like? It shows you a lot about how they think and how they plan. And then final decision based on the score of all of those things. The thing here too about the 10 to the 12 questions is I ask everybody the same questions, and that way, again, we're being fair and we're scoring people fairly. It's not that you can't go off script. The best sales interviews do. Of course, you want it to be, you know, you want to have rapport and chemistry and be talking back and forth, but you want to make sure that you hit the same questions across the board for everybody. So that's just a little bit about how I go about thinking about hiring the right people in the early stage. The candidate scoring is so important for me. The next thing is setting them up for success. And the biggest mistake that I see here is lost time. So we're thinking about hiring, we find somebody to hire, they start, and we spent a lot of time floundering around because we just didn't spend a little bit of time before they started getting ready for them. So who you want to hire, that's a minimum. And we already talked about that. But then, you know, to onboard them, you need to be really clear about who you sell to and how. So I think about like minimum hiring prerequisites and having those things ready before I go out to hire. But certainly when I've hired, before they're in seat, being ready with those things, because you don't want to have a salesperson come on board and you're not really ready for them. So I'm going to show you a couple of ways to be ready, but just to make sure, again, you're clear on the role, you've got an ideal candidate profile for who you're hiring, you've got your recruiting process all figured out ahead of time, and you know your quota and your compensation. And we'll talk in a minute here about how to set up quota, but then you want to make sure when they get there that there's just, if I think about minimum that you need to have, right? You need to have your ideal customer profile. You've got to be really clear for AEs who they're selling to, the problems you solve and why. If they're SDR, same thing, right? Who are they calling on? Who are they trying to find to book a qualified appointment for you? You need to have either leads to give them or tools for them to find the leads. And that can be as simple as something like Sales Navigator from LinkedIn. But you need to be clear on like, how is that person getting leads? Are you going to give them leads, or are you going to expect them to go get leads? So that's really important. And then one thing I like to have is like in the beginning, you don't have like full-blown onboarding, training, things like that. That's fine. So what I do is like a 30, 60, 90 activities and outcomes plan, which I'll show you a sample of here in a minute. And then the other thing is just having realistic expectations, which we'll talk about too. But when I think about when the day start, day one, I don't want to waste time. I don't want to be in 6 weeks going, man, we really wasted 6 weeks floundering around because we weren't ready for that person. What I think about is having a plan for onboarding. Now, again, you don't have to have crazy onboarding materials and training materials. Don't waste time on that in the beginning, but you do want to have a sense for like, how will they get trained? Are they going to sit around and watch webinars? Are they going to sit on sales demos with with you? Just think through, how are you actually going to get them up to speed on the product and the market? So you create a 30, 60, 90. And then you need some kind of CRM. Pipedrive is pretty common. I see a lot of, there's a few, there's Copper, Salesforce, obviously you might need later stage, or you can start with it, but you're gonna need some place to put the leads. Later, you're gonna need a sales engagement platform. You do need leads or plan for leads. And then later also you're gonna need a sales playbook. So again, thinking about kind of stages. In the beginning, just a CRM, place to put the leads and track the activities so that you can track the emails that you're sending and set tasks to remind yourself to call that person, 3 days from now and send them another email too, that kind of thing. Just a simple CRM. Some way to find leads or give them leads. Sales Navigator, again, is the most common one I see, but there's lots of ways to sort of figure out how you're gonna get leads or find leads. And then that 30, 60, 90. And that's just it in the beginning. Don't overthink it. Like one thing I will struggle with is they overblow it, right? So they go, well, like, I can't hire a salesperson because I don't have a marketing automation and I don't have Sales Loft and I don't have this and I don't have that. And that's crazy. Like, we can sell with a phone and an email and a good idea of who we're selling to and what we're selling. And so a lot of those things just are kind of momentum killers. So I just always say, just don't over engineer the beginning. Just keep it simple. Focus on getting them leads or how they're going to get leads, and sort of, again, who you sell to and what you sell. But then now, as you get a little bit more mature, so as we start to enter in that kind of 2 to 5 million ARR range, that's where we're going to need something like something for leads, like a Sales Navigator plus, right? We might be using Discover Org, think tools like that to help with lead intel. We need to start to know how we're going to onboard and train people, because we start to hire in that stage. And then at this stage is when we do need a sales engagement platform. So that's going to be something like Outreach or Sales Loft, because it's going to make us more efficient. And so those tools are like sales sequencing tools that let you take a lead and put it through a sequence of calls and emails, and it automatically sets tasks to remind you to, when to call, and it automatically sends the emails for you. And that's really the only way to manage leads at scale anymore. So a sales engagement platform becomes important. And there's some simple ones that are actually great for enterprise sales, like Mixmax. So there's a few options. And then again, as you sort of get to that 5 million mark, you do start to need a sales playbook. So those are like your training materials. And that's it. Then you just continue to invest and evolve those tools. But I think the key here is at 1 to 2 million, don't overblow it. But as you near the later stage of the sort of getting into 5 million in ARR, you need to be thinking about that sales playbook. And this can be, a sales playbook can be 10 pages of content. It can be 100 pages of content, right? And that it will probably be 10 pages of content in the beginning. And when you get to 10 million in ARR, it's probably 100 pages. But at a minimum, you just want to have documentation around who is your buyer. You don't need to go do formal, buyer personas or anything like that. I just, again, keep it simple. Like, who do you sell to? Who are your best fit prospects? What does the company look like, and what are the roles? What do they care about? Things like that. So some light conversation guides. Just how do we, qualify people? How do we? What are our icebreakers when we get a cold lead on the phone? What do we say? That kind of thing. You want to document your sales process and your sales methodology as you start to get, 3, 4, 5 people on the team. That's really important. Information about your product and your service, like demo materials, training materials, etc. And then becomes really important also to have your competitive landscape, so competitive battle cards, or just some information about what's happening competitively, and then documenting your processes. So that's all later stage though. Okay, holding people accountable, the least fun part, but the most important. One thing that's interesting in early stages, we tend not to set quotas. And it can be a huge mistake. And the reason we don't set quotas is because we think, well, I don't even know how to set quota. I'm the founder. I've been selling. I know how much I can sell, but I don't have any clue what the first salesperson is going to be able to sell. Or we just think, well, they're going to sell as much as I sold, or they're not going to be able to sell as much as I sell. So we tend to kind of get murky about this whole quota thing. And the thing is that real true salespeople need a number to hit. They're competitive, they're internally competitive, they're externally competitive, and they're motivated by numbers. So we can lose a lot of time in the early stages, again, floundering around without like having clear metrics to hit. So it's super important when thinking about motivating your team, whether it's one person or 5 people or 10 people, with metrics and benchmarks. So quota is how we do that, right? So if you really have no idea how to set a quota, that's totally fine. A lot of times, I mean, early stage sales leaders, even experienced ones, are honestly making it up based on best guess, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's also benchmarks, right? You can talk to some mentors and advisors, or you can look at just sort of what should it be. And if you really don't know and you're worried about this, don't not set a quota, just set a quarterly quota. And then, so you can start to just do quarterly quotas, and then you can look at each quarter and say, how did we do? Was that too low, too high, just right? And adjust from there. So that's sort of got to have a number to hit. A couple just like benchmarks to give you an idea. We always want to manage for outcomes. Like we want bookings, right? We want revenue, but before that, at first couple salespeople, it could take a while to like sort of know what does the ramp and runway look like for that. So then we're just going to be measuring activity. So an account executive, you can set benchmarks to say, especially if they don't have a pipeline yet, you can, you got to call big 20 calls a day and send 20 emails. And if you're hiring an SDR to book qualified appointments for you or for AEs, then it's going to be 60 calls and 60 emails. These are just rules of thumbs. There's plenty of SDRs who make 40 calls a day and plenty that make 80 calls a day, but you've got to get a number and you've got to hold people accountable to hit that number, right? So what you don't want to do is say, hey, SDR, here's some talk tracks. Here's our buyer information. Here's thousands of leads. Go make 60 calls a day and send 60 emails, and then have them not held accountable to do that, or to be calling 30 people a day. So you've got to hit those, you've got to set those numbers, expectations, and then have people self-report on them, and later you'll have systems and tools that will be reporting on those too. So we can manage for activity in the beginning when we don't know what else to manage for, but then we get into managing for outcomes. And for like SDRs and even for AEs that are building their pipeline, that's going to be things like appointments. How many appointments did you set? How many qualified opportunities did you open? How many deals did you close? New bookings, things like that. Just to give you a couple of, just if you really have no clue how to set a quota, an enterprise rep annual quota is going to range, usually what I see is between 750,000 to all the way up to 2 million in ARR if it's a true enterprise, like that 500,000 ACV or something. But it's usually going to be right around $1 million is what I'd say, sort of average. And that pipeline coverage might be 3 to 4x. And what that means is if somebody's going to have to close $1 million, they're going to need to have 3 to 4 million of deals worth of deals in their pipeline. So you want to think too, like if somebody's got a quota, they need far more than that in their pipeline to actually meet that quota. So that's just to give you an example. And then SDRs, usually a good rule of thumb is like 10 qualified opportunities per month. If you have a lower ACV or it's a easier sale, their quota might be 20 qualified opportunities a month, or it might be 5 if you're selling something with a really high ACV. But 10 is something I see pretty commonly. One thing is we forget to factor in ramping, and this is a big one because, again, as we start to hire our first couple of people, we don't know what it's going to take to ramp them, and oftentimes we have unrealistic ramping expectations. So let's talk a little bit about ramp time. First is it's always longer than you think it should take, always. But there's a delicate balance here, because what you don't want to do is have the wrong rep not producing results and not recognizing that sooner, right? So the worst thing can be that you've held on to a rep for a year thinking that's what it took to ramp, and then come to find out they were the wrong rep for you. So it's really hard with your first couple of team members that you have to really look at leading indicators like qualified pipeline and holding them accountable that is actually qualified pipe. But, and we'll talk about that here in a minute, but just to give you some guidelines on what we see a lot with ramping is an enterprise rep, it might take them a full year to to get up to full quota bearing. In the way that breaks down is like month 1 to 2, they're onboarding and learning. Month 3 and 4, they're starting to build pipeline. But maybe you have a 60-day or 90-day sales cycle, so they're not really closing deals until month 5 or 6. Even if they started building pipeline 4 weeks in, if you think about it, if you got a 60-day sales cycle, that's maybe closing a deal at 90 days. If all of the stars aligned and they opened up the right kind of opportunity in the beginning, which is highly unlikely. So really month 9 is when you should start to see some predictability from that rep on the enterprise side. And how this works out for you and your organization is obviously going to vary, but these are just kind of rules of thumb, benchmarks. And then if you were to get an SDR, month 1, they're on the phone. Month 2, they're starting to book qualified appointments, but they're also still figuring out like what is a qualified appointment. It takes a while to cut your teeth. And then, month 3, they're fully ramped. And if you think about it, so let's say they book an appointment month 2, and you've got a 90-day sales cycle, those deals aren't closing until 5 months in. So it's really challenging in the beginning when you don't have these kind of predictable hiring machines and ramping machines, because you don't know. You could be 5 months in with an SDR going like, man, is this SDR really bad? Am I doing it wrong? Is the SDR doing it wrong? We haven't closed any deals yet. So that's why you really need to kind of have some of these early indicators to look and say, this is a good SDR. They are booking qualified appointments that are going into the pipeline, and those deals are highly likely to close. But it is definitely a challenge in the beginning, how patient to be. But what helps with that is holding people accountable. And that's a big challenge for a lot of founders who sell, or early employees who start leading the sales team. It's really uncomfortable to hold people accountable, and it's something we're not often used to. One of the things I like to do, and I've talked about it a couple times here over the last 40 minutes or so, is 30, 60, 90-day plans. And this is great when you don't have a way to train people necessarily, or it is salesperson 1. I document, what do I expect them to do during the first 30 days, right? So I expect them to sit on all the customer calls. I expect them to meet with all the team members at the company. I expect them to start reading industry blogs, whatever it might be. I will map out everything I expect them to do within 30 days, within 60, and then within 90. And that just helps me say, right, are they doing the right thing? Because again, in the first couple of salespeople, you don't really know what the indicators are to know that you've got the right person and you're not wasting time. So I map out what the expectations are in terms of activities, and I make sure that I'm meeting with the person regularly to talk about those and make sure that they're on track and that they're kind of self-directing these things. And then I have outcomes, right? So what do I expect them to have achieved by 30, 60, and 90? Can they do a demo? Are they independently running sales calls? Whatever it might be. In the beginning, you need, especially for sales rep 1 or 2, you have to manage to a 30, 60, 90, and you have to hold yourself accountable. I have a company that I do some advisory work with, and I help them hire their first salesperson, sales rep 1. They had a sales rep who had scored let's say a 15 out of 20. And they fell in love with that person, and they hired them even though they weren't the highest scorer. And then they had a 30, 60, 90, but they didn't manage to it. And so come 12 months in to this person's, this first sales rep's year, and they hadn't closed a deal yet and had not really opened much qualified pipe. And of course, you can imagine that those founders were very regretful that they hadn't managed to the 30, 60, 90, and they hadn't hired the top scoring candidates. So this 30, 60, 90 and using it daily with your initial hires is really, really important, and holding yourself accountable to hold them accountable. And then the other thing you can do is, this is just one screenshot out of like a 20 slide deck. I usually ask early stage salespeople to work on business plans, their own business. How are you going to develop enough pipeline? How are you going to move your deals to the funnel? How are you going to make sure you hit quota? Things like that. So you want to be having the early stage sales team doing those things. Yeah, there's some, I can send you a sample of what an early stage sort of account executive business plan looks like, but it's important to have them doing that work and then holding them accountable to execute on their plans for sure. And then the most important thing we can do with our early employees in terms of holding them accountable is asking them really uncomfortable questions. And be prepared to be uncomfortable is what I always say. So are we enforcing how we want them to sell? Are we enforcing a sales process, right? Like we discover, we qualify, we do, evaluation, whatever it kind of is. Are we making sure that the reps are following the sales process? Are we asking questions like who the decision maker is? Have you met with them? Who are the stakeholders? Do you know all of the stakeholders, right? Because early stage reps will sit and say, okay, I've got this deal and it's going to close next month. And as sales leaders or founders that are leading the sales team, we have to be able to say, what's their procurement process? What evidence do you have that it's closing then, right? What are they basing their purchase decision on? What is their business pain or need? And doing a lot of this inquisition is really, really important with our early stage sales team members. It's always important, but it's really important in the early stage to have these deep conversations about the deals that your early stage reps are working. Okay, we're nearing the end. There's just one more, which is being a good leader. Whether you're going to lead the sales team yourself or whether you're going to have an early stage sales leader in, either way, you still need to be a good leader and sort of hold that, make sure the machine is built for success to get you to scale. So you want to be making sure that you're metrics driven. And that's going to be activities and outcomes. What you care about are outcomes, but until you have outcomes, you have to manage for activity. So that gets back to, how many calls, emails, social engagements are people doing? How many calls does it take them to get a meeting? How many meetings are they setting? How many meetings are they holding, et cetera, things like that. And then on the outcome side, right? Like how much contract have they booked? How are they pacing to their goal or their quota? How much pipeline do they have? What's their win rate, their sales cycle, the average contract value? Why are they losing deals? So if this screen looks like Greek to you, that's okay. You can do a lot of research and get yourself up to speed, but it's important to understand the sort of essential sales management metrics so that you live them and breathe them and watch for trends. And as you do that, you'll see what are the levers that you can pull to, sell more. You can look for red flags, et cetera. So there's lots of great information around these metrics. But as soon as you have the first couple of salespeople, you want to be monitoring these types of metrics for sure. And then understanding sales math. And so I will tell you a story about my first sales mentor is a guy named Keenan. You can find him at asalesguy.com. You can follow his blog. I will say he drops a lot of F-bombs, so it's not for the faint of heart, but he's fantastic. He was my, when I first accidentally started leading my first startup sales team, Keenan was my mentor and advisor, and he was really a consultant to me. And I had at the time about 3 sales reps that I had inherited. I was the founder. I had a sales leader. It didn't work out. And now here I was looking at managing these 3 reps myself. And I needed to make a plan for the following year. And so Keenan said, okay, what's the goal? I said, okay, it's X million in revenue. And he's like, okay, great. How are we going to get there? And I started, my first sentence was, I said, each rep's going to deliver 10 deals a month. And then I started to go into all the other things that was going to happen to get to this, mythical number for next year. But he stopped me right there. And he was like, whoa, 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 whoa. What do you mean each rep is going to have 10 deals a month? And I said, well, yeah, my whole plan for next year, how we're going to hit our number is we're going to have each, we have 3 reps. We'll have 30 deals a month because each rep's going to do 10 deals a month. And he said, Anna, right now each rep is doing 3 deals a month. So you're closing 9 deals. And so how are you going to do this? And I said, well, we're just going to do it. Like each rep's going to have to get better. They're going to have to close 10. And this went on for probably 15 minutes of this circular logic. And he was saying, well, you can't magically get reps that are closing 3 to close 10. And I was like, well, they just have to. And this is the first time that I started to understand sales math. And the point was, if I had reps who were consistently each closing 3 deals a month, there might be some things I could shift and tweak and skills we could develop, but I was not going to magically get reps who consistently delivered 3 deals a month to deliver 10. And so I had built my whole plan on this ridiculous premise. And we had to take it all apart and rebuild it, assuming that each rep would deliver 3 deals per month. And that drastically changed who I needed to hire, when I needed to hire them, what the number could be for next year. And it was a very painful lesson. And of course, we can always do better, right? But in that following year, what I had to model was that on average,